10. What it was really like to be a servant in Versailles and more theme. From chamber pots to chandeliers, life behind the golden mirrors of France's infamous court. Segment 1. Why you wouldn't last a day as a palace servant. Up at 4 a.m., endless gossip, powdered wigs, empty stomach, and a strict code of silence. Segment 2. The madness of Marie Antoinette's court. From lavish costumes to scandalous rumors, the path to revolution began in silk. Segment 3. The lost rooms of Versailles. Secret staircases, hidden doors, and entire wings buried in dust. Segment 4. Life as a French noble. The etiquette of fans, mirrors, and powdered hair, a performance of power. 14 hours a day. Imagine. It's 4 o'clock a.m. The stone floor beneath your feet is cold. You've barely slept, and yet there's no time to yawn. No room for delay. Your duties began before the day itself. As a servant at Versailles, whether valet, scullion, or ladies' maid, your life was ruled by the clock, though you didn't own one yourself. Time was kept by bells, footsteps, and habits. The rhythm of your life was dictated by someone else's needs. You lived in service to routine, to ritual, to relentless repetition. There were over 1,000 servants working within the palace walls at any one time. Not all were royal employees. Many were privately hired by nobles who brought their own staff. And those who served lived in a curious sort of half-existence, neither entirely seen nor fully invisible. Let's begin with the mornings. Your first task might be kindling a fire in a chamber that wasn't yours. Careful not to wake the nobles still curled in downy linens. You move without speaking. Always without speaking. Silence, you see, was the first rule of the palace servant. The halls echoed enough already, and voices especially yours were not part of the ambiance. Perhaps you were a valet de chambre, preparing the shaving water and brushing your master's coat. Or a fille de chambre, assisting with the intricate layers of corsets, petticoats, stays, and silk. And all of this had to be done precisely. Clothes were more than fashion. They were rank, they were dignity, they were armor. And dressing a noble was a performance, a daily ritual, steeped in hierarchy, performed under the weight of a dozen watching eyes. But your day didn't end there. In fact, it barely began. You were expected to be ready, always, to adjust a ruffle, fetch a letter, find a mislaid fan, to run across endless marble floors in shoes not suited for speed, to endure orders, moods, and long silences. You rarely sat down. You rarely ate properly. Meals came late, cold, and often alone if at all. The nobility dined on pheasant and creams. Perhaps soup, thin and steaming in a chipped bowl, eaten beside a stairwell. But in your quarters often, a small loft above a corridor, or even a narrow cot behind a false wall, the scent was different. You, a bowl of porridge. Bread, if lucky. The air in the palace was thick with perfume and candle smoke, damp wool, sweaty linens, soap, mice perhaps. Still, there was a strange pride to be had. You were inside the palace. You had seen the king pass by. You knew which duchess was late to court and which marquise had fallen ill. Gossip was currency among servants, exchanged in whispers while polishing mirrors or sweeping crumbs from silk-carpeted floors. But your job required discipline. And the greatest rule of all, remain unseen, to be present, but never part. To make things happen, while leaving no trace that you had ever touched them. Punishment for mistakes varied. Sometimes it was a scolding, other times dismissal. And to be dismissed from Versailles was not merely to lose a job. It was to be cast out of the very center of French society. The rhythm of their lives, these silent workers of Versailles, was one of constant adjustment, to temperaments, to timing, to expectations. And behind every elegant gesture made by a duchess, behind every gleam on the king's polished floor, there was someone who had woken long before dawn to make it so. Required people who rarely saw the sunlight. In this golden cage, beauty was everything. But beauty required maintenance. And maintenance? So now, as we leave behind these hidden hallways and quiet hands, we step forward into the brighter, louder, and more absurd world of the glittering court. Now, we step from the servants' staircase into the grand salons. The floor no longer creaks beneath your feet, gleams. The air is warmer, perfumed with orange blossoms, rosewater, and pomade. And ahead floats a world that is dazzling, absurd, and strangely detached from the rhythm of real life. This is the court of Marie Antoinette. She was not born here. She arrived from Austria at the age of 14, a bride in silk slippers sent to marry the French Dauphin. And though Versailles already shimmered with artifice, she brought with her a different sort of magic lighter, more reckless and perhaps more fragile. The court was a stage, and Marie Antoinette became both its star and its prisoner. Her days were measured not in hours, but in appearances. Everything was watched, everything. From the way she held her teacup to the color of her ribbons, there was no privacy. Even waking and dressing were public ceremonies, known as the lever and couture, in which nobles, sometimes dozens, were present to assist or observe her as she rose or went to bed. She was surrounded. All eyes, always. Imagine it now. It's early morning. The queen sits still as her hair is piled high with powder and wire, reaching heights of half a meter or more. Pearls are pinned into it. Birds, ships, even entire scenes made from silk. These were not mere hairstyles. There were conversations, statements, rumors woven into fashion. The clothing was no less extravagant. Waistlines cinched tightly, sleeves puffed, collars fanned, skirts so wide that two women could not pass through a doorway side by side. To be at court was to perform wealth, to signal favor, to glitter, even if your heart or your purse was hollow. Marie Antoinette both embraced and rejected this performance. She spent lavishly in gowns on gambling, on miniature portraits and porcelain figurines. And yet, she longed for simplicity. She withdrew from formal court at times, retreating to the petty Trianon, a smaller estate built for her pleasure where only her closest friends were allowed. She dressed as a shepherdess. There picked flowers, wore muslin instead of brocade, played with lambs. Idyllic fantasy life behind the palace gates. Reputation mattered more than reality, became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the music was changing. The cost of illusion would be paid in blood. Monarchy. But even this attempt at freedom was seen as a provocation. You see, while grain prices soared and stomachs growled in Paris, the queen whispers began. Pamphlets were printed, others as something worse. Some depicted her as a heartless spendthrift. The rumors were venomous and persistent. That she danced while France starved. That she had secret lovers. That she bathed in milk while children died in the streets. A name rarely came clean. Most of it wasn't true. But it didn't matter. At Versailles, and once stained, Marie Antoinette's court was not just about silk and scandal. It was about tension, about performance under pressure. One poorly chosen ribbon could signal disgrace. Where one wrong smile, where the clatter of fans opening in unison was a kind of applause or warning. So delicately balanced, could not last forever. This world, and in the grand salons and mirrored halls, a quiet storm was building. The courtiers danced, and soon, but for now, let's step away from the crush of perfume and politics. Let us slip through a hidden panel behind the golden moldings and enter a quieter part of the palace, where forgotten rooms lie in silence and the past lingers in dust. Beyond the hall of mirrors, past the salons of marble and gold, there exists another Versailles, one you do not see on the postcards. A Versailles of locked doors, sealed staircases, and windowless rooms that once pulsed with quiet utility, then faded, and were never spoken of again. The Palace of Versailles, you see, was never a perfect structure. It grew over time like ivy on stone sprouting new wings. Shifting corridors, secret stairwells added hastily as the needs of the court changed. Rooms were divided. Rooms were sealed. Some were simply forgotten. There are entire levels, tucked between the floors you walk on as a tourist today, that once housed governesses, scribes, candlemakers, laundresses, and scribes. Today, they are silent layers of lives, fossilized in brick and dust. Imagine now you are in one of these spaces. A narrow passage barely wide enough for your shoulders, with cracked plaster on the walls and a faint smell of beeswax lingering in the air. The wooden beams above you were scorched once perhaps by candlelight, left unattended 2 centuries ago. The floor is uneven, and the only light filters dimly through a broken shutter, casting long, slow-moving shadows on the ground. This might have been a nursemaid's quarters, or a corridor used by royal children, sneaking between their tutors and their toys, or a room reserved for a disgraced noble, quietly moved out of sight after falling from favor. Some rooms were never meant to be grand. They were meant to serve the grandeur. Storage rooms for chamber pots, vaults for powdered wigs. Tiny kitchens that produced the petits fours served 3 halls away. In one sealed chamber discovered only in recent decades, psychologists found remnants of velvet wallpaper, a broken wash basin, and the rusted key to a room with no door. Theories swirl. Was it a servant's hidden bedroom, a mistress's waiting room, or simply a forgotten supply closet, elevated by time into mystery? These lost rooms are stories half told. They whisper of the invisible. The footman who waited all night just in case a duke's candle sputtered. The scullery maid who slept beside the soapy warmth of copper pans. The clerk who copied names for hours, hunched over ink by a window no one saw. And some of these spaces were more than forgotten. They were deliberately erased. When revolutions come, they do not just change the future, they rewrite the past. Certain rooms that once housed private meetings or symbols of royal decadence were bricked up, concealed as if to say, "This never happened." But Versailles remembers. Its walls still hum faintly, with footsteps that no longer echo. Behind one mirror lies a passage that leads nowhere. Behind another a forgotten chapel, birds nest in a chandelier that hasn't sparkled in 200 years. Never finished. In one attic, and so we drift here, unvisited in the dusty silence behind the splendor, where history sleeps unseen, but not quite gone. Let us leave now, through a panel you didn't know was a door, and ascend once more into the blazing brilliance of the elite, where powdered hair and painted fans were weapons, and etiquette was both armor and cage. You're no longer a servant, no longer a hidden presence behind the walls. You are now seen at all times. You wear silk. You wear powder. You wear expectation like a second skin. Welcome to life as a French noble at Versailles. It may sound enviable, velvet cushions, banquet halls, jewels in the hair, music in the gardens. And yes, it was luxury, but luxury with no escape. Nobles at Versailles were not free. They were trapped in layers of etiquette, in the gaze of their peers, in a daily cycle so rigid it left little room for thought or rest. Your morning began not with peace, but with performance. Before your eyes were fully open, your day was already under review. Your clothes, your posture, your smile, lit, all mattered. Every gesture was a signal. Every accessory, a statement. Imagine yourself standing in the hall of mirrors. You cannot yawn. You cannot lean against the wall. Your fan must open just so. Your hands must remain visible. And if you speak, you must never forget to bow your head the correct number of degrees, depending on who you address. It was a kind of theater, and like all great productions, it had rules. The rules of Versailles were not written in books. They were passed down in gestures, whispers, the slight lift of an eyebrow. To be a noble was to know these things, and to fear forgetting them. There was a language of mirrors. To stand before one was not merely to admire yourself, but to confirm your place in the hierarchy. The queen had her own mirrors, of course, and to be invited to adjust your hair before them was to be noticed. And there was the language of fans, open wide, I am interested. Closed, suddenly, I am insulted. Slow fluttering, I am bored. A fan was not merely a breeze, was a battle cry. Meals were formal affairs. Even when not dining with the king, you were never alone. You were always being watched. You may have eaten swan, or delicately layered pastries filled with candied orange peel, but every bite had a rhythm. Every movement was part of the choreography. To speak too loudly, to laugh too freely, to spill even a drop of wine, could cause quiet scandal. This attention to detail extended to every moment. To walk down a corridor required the right companions. To dance, the correct gloves. To appear in public without your hairdresser's approval, unthinkable. And yet, spite the silks and perfumes and endless entertainments, there was a deep restlessness in noble life. You could not leave Versailles without permission. You could not marry freely. You could not speak against the king, not even in jest. Your home was not your own. Your schedule dictated. Your children often raised by others. Even love was limited. Romantic liaisons were frequent, but rarely private, and a wrong affair could mean ruin. So you played your part, day after day, hour after hour, with a smile and powdered cheeks and a heart that often longed to be elsewhere. And yet, you did not leave, because to leave was to vanish. In Versailles, presence was power, and absence was oblivion. So you remained among the mirrors beneath the chandeliers, in shoes that pinched and wigs that itched, repeating your lines, perfecting your bow long after the music stopped. Now, as we step back from these golden halls, let us reflect gently on what we've seen, and slowly descend toward rest. Imagine yourself standing on a crooked wooden balcony, 5 stories above a narrow alleyway that barely sees the sun. Below, a tangle of voices echoes off stone and plaster merchants shouting prices. Children chasing dogs, the muffled clatter of pots and pans. You re in a Roman insulo, one of the countless multi-story apartment blocks that house the city's working poor. The walls around you are thin, the mortar already flaking. The floor creaks with each step. Somewhere, water drips, slow and steady. You can smell oil and smoke, some from last night's cooking fire, some from the nearby papine or taverns where the clink of dice never quite stops. Fire was a constant fear. Many insulae were made of wood, and lamps fueled by oil or tallow flickered dangerously beside straw bedding. Early in the morning, before the sun became too harsh, you might carry your clay jug down to the nearest lacus and wait in line. And the Tiber River itself sluggish and brown, especially in summer. And though Rome had public baths, soap as we know it was nt common. Most Romans scrubbed with sand or olive oil before scraping their skin clean with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. Beneath, a trench of flowing water carried waste away, while a secondary channel ran in front where communal sponges on sticks sat soaking, ready for reuse. Musicians drifted through alleys with lyres and red pipes. Priests passed with incense, and even the occasional donkey, painted blue and draped in flowers, might appear as part of a local festival or procession. These buildings were hastily built, often by profit-hungry landlords who crammed tenants into. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Palatine Hill, looking out over the city below. It is the summer of 64 CE, and Rome sleeps uneasily under a dense and unfamiliar haze. Perhaps a spark from a careless vendor's stove, or perhaps something more deliberate. The truth, like so much in Roman history, is obscured by the smoke. The first flames are said to have begun in the shops near the Circus Maximus. What is certain is this: the fire spread fast. Rome was a city of narrow streets, wooden balconies, and dry timber roofs piled one atop another. People scream in the streets, dragging bundles of possessions, searching for children or the elderly. Statues melt in the heat. The marble of temples cracks. Columns topple. Water carriers form frantic lines, but the aqueducts cannot keep up. Even the mighty Tiber offers little help. Once the fire found fuel, it leaped like a living thing from stall to apartment, from temple to tavern. It moved with the wind, cracking through tiles, curling into alleys, and roaring across the skyline. Their homes, their gods, their livelihoods all swallowed by fire. Picture the scene. The sky glows red through the night. Others suggest he sang, watching the flames from a safe distance, dressed in stage costume, reciting lines from Homer as Troy burned. Others were crucified or burned alive to provide light at night in the imperial gardens. There were chariot races and music. The scent of roasted meat, pork, beef, human drifted over the crowds, mingling with incense and sweat. Of Rome's 14 districts, 10 are scorched. 3 are reduced to cinders. Thousands are left homeless. He returned quickly not to fight the fire, but to seize the moment. And upon this charred earth, Nero began construction on something extraordinary. The Domus Aurea, or Golden House. And where, you might ask, is the emperor? Nero, young, theatrical, deeply enamored with his own legend, was at his villa in Antium when the fire broke out. They refused to worship the emperor or the traditional gods, to create the blank canvas he needed to build his dream. Rotating dining rooms perfumed with saffron and rosewater. Man-made lakes, vineyards, and gardens dotted with statues and fountains. They met in secret, spoke of resurrection, and called one another brother and sister. To many, they were foreigners, radicals, conspiracies, real and imagined, multiplied. He exiled senators, murdered his own mother, and alienated the military. And, conveniently, expendable. Some sources say he opened the Field of Mars and his own gardens to refugees. And new Rome reimagined, reorganized rose above it. Did he truly fiddle as Rome blazed? Likely not. Fiddles did not yet exist. But the rumor, persistent and damning, clung to him. And the people, broken and displaced, needed someone to blame. To silence growing outrage, Nero cast suspicion upon a small, increasingly visible sect. The Christians. They were strange to Roman eyes. Nero's response was swift and savage, an attempt, however brief, to tame a city that had always teetered on the edge of chaos. He ordered mass arrests, not just of leaders, but of entire families. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. This spectacle was dressed up as entertainment. Nero hosted games and performances, and all the while, the emperor performed. A poet, a singer, an actor on a stage of ash. But his theatrics could not entirely mask the reality. The fire had cleared vast tracts of land in the city's center prime real estate. It would be no mere palace, but a city within the city. Imagine golden walls and vaulted ceilings painted with fantastical beasts. Where once stood the homes of merchants and priests, now shimmered a monument to imperial ego. The people noticed. They grumbled. And the rumors persisted that Nero had started the fire himself, not out of malice, but for art. Eventually, this dream would contribute to his downfall. In the years that followed, Nero's paranoia deepened, and when the Senate finally declared him a public enemy, he fled abandoned, trembling, asking his companions if history would remember what an artist he had been. He died by his own hand, or rather by that of a servant, in a quiet villa on the outskirts of the empire he once ruled. Yet the fire he sparked, whether literal or symbolic, changed Rome forever. In its wake came new building codes, wider streets, height limits on apartment buildings, fireproofing with brick and stone. The charred remains of old Rome sank into the ground. But not all of it was buried. Some of it lingered, waiting beneath ash and soil and time. Which brings us to a city frozen not by flame, but by stone. a city whose secrets would sleep for nearly 2,000 years. Until, one day, they were uncovered by accident. Let us now journey to the edge of the Bay of Naples, to the shadow of Vesuvius, to the haunted sun-baked streets of Pompeii. Now, imagine yourself stepping through the grand entrance of a Roman domicile private home belonging to a senator of wealth and influence. The door is tall, inlaid with bronze, and opened by a silent line of slaves who bow their heads as you pass. Inside, the air is cool and scented with myrrh. Sunlight filters through the compluvium central opening in the ceiling, casting soft light on the impluvium below. A shallow basin that collects rainwater. This, the atrium, is not just a hallway, but a statement of status. You see family busts on pedestals, wax death masks of honored ancestors, and mosaics underfoot so finely arranged that they appear to ripple like cloth. You are a guest here, invited to a dinner ceni, more than a meal, truly an event, one that may stretch late into the night. You are led to a triclinium, the formal dining room, where 3 couches arranged in a U shape surround a low, polished table. You recline gently on cushions, leaning on your left elbow, as was the custom, leaving your right hand free to eat. All around, there is movement, slaves gliding with pitchers of water and wine, musicians tuning lyres, the gentle tapping of sandals across polished marble. Oil lamps flicker, and the air glows with their golden light. Peacock tongues served cold are prized delicacies, and the aroma of honey-glazed ham drifts above all. The host appears robed in a fresh white toga with a deep purple stripe, signifying senatorial rank. But more than taste, this is about display. Some dishes are sculpted to resemble animals or scenes from mythology. The secunda mensa, the desert course. One dish, perhaps, or a dancer. A boy plays the double flute. Incense burns from braziers shaped like tiny temples, filling the room with a scent of frankincense and bay. But here, in this candlelit room, the empire's upper crust drifts in a soft haze of satisfaction. Perhaps, is in hosting such a meal, the senator confirms his place in Roman society. He demonstrates generosity, education, wealth, and control. Everything about the setting, the food, the decor, the performers is calculated to impress. Served in a hollow pastry shell shaped like a phoenix, cracking it open releases steam and the scent of cinnamon. His hair is carefully curled, his demeanor smooth and confident, rehearsed in both politics and hospitality. Tonight's meal will unfold in 3 acts. Some begin to loosen their tunics, laughing gently, wine loosening their tongues. The conversation turns toward politics, poetry, or philosophy. The first course, the gestatio, arrives on gleaming trays. Eggs sprinkled with fish sauce. Small savory pastries, olives dusted with herbs, sea urchins, and perhaps even dormice stuffed with minced meat. Herbs and pine nuts, roasted and delicately presented. Dates stuffed with almonds, honey cakes, and nuts. Candied violets, snow, brought down from the mountains and mixed with fruit syrups, all accompanied by a thicker, spiced wine, less refreshing, more contemplative. Every joke, every compliment, every glance is measured. You compliment the wine, noting its Falernian origin, and the host smiles pleased by your familiarity with such rare vintages. There is mulsum to wine, sweetened with honey, served cool in glass beakers etched with patterns. On the wall behind you, a painted scene. Dionysus reclining on a tiger, surrounded by nymphs. Above the doors, the meal slows. Plates are cleared. Guests shift lazily on their couches. A final libation is poured to the gods. Small favors rings. Combs, carved figurines may be gifted to the guests as tokens of the evening. Carvings of grapevines and laurel branches. You sip your wine, its sharpness softened by honey, and listen to the laughter echoing off polished stone. Conversation flows, but always carefully. To dine in Rome at this level is not merely to eat, is to perform. Then comes the prima mensa, the main course. Slaves emerge in a procession, bearing trays of roasted meats, boar with dates, peacock with saffron glaze, Fish arranged to mimic sea serpents. There are vegetables too, though not as lavishly treated. Asparagus dressed with oil and pepper. Lentils simmered with vinegar and leeks. Cabbage flavored with cumin. The food is abundant and artfully arranged. As the guests recline, and then figs. A poet is summoned. This is not merely luxury, it is identity. You glance around. Eventually, outside, the city is quiet. The poor are sleeping in crowded insulae or gathered in the flickering corners of late-night taverns. And yet, even in this moment of indulgence, one is reminded subtly, quietly, that all things are fleeting. A mosaic on the floor reads, "Memento mori." Remember that you must die. Because in Rome, no matter how grand the feast, how golden the cup, or how fragrant the incense, time marches on. And even the most opulent meal must eventually end. And now, the oil lamps have dimmed, the couches left empty, and the once lively Roman home lies quiet beneath the stars. Together, through the uneven streets of ancient Rome, from the creaking top floors of crowded tenements, to the firelit nightmare of Nero's burning city, to the silent, ash-covered ruins of Pompeii, and finally, to the quiet elegance of a senator's banquet. Outside its doors, the narrow alleys of the Suburra sleep uneasily. Somewhere, a dog barks in the distance. Somewhere else, the Tiber laps slowly at its banks. The silver platters are cleared, but you are far away now. The stillness and the comfort of knowing you are here, in the present, where the fires have long since gone out. We have wandered now, as the city sleeps, into sleep. Remember that you carry these echoes with you. That history is not just marble columns or battlefields, but the shared memory of being human. We pause not to gawk, strangely familiar. The quiet grief of a mother clutching her child in Pompeii. It's the fatigue of a porter climbing 5 flights to his rented room. It's the slow pride of a poet reciting under candlelight. As the wealthy recline in velvet silence, not to judge, but to listen. In each place, they scrubbed their hands with sand. They waited in line for bread. In fragments of mosaic and ink, plaster and bone, they whispered to us still. They gossiped, they worried, they loved. To hear the rhythm of lives so distant and were forgotten. These were real people, not urgently. They squinted into the morning sun. They lived, cleaning, walking, wondering, and yet not loudly. The Roman world is behind you gently, respectfully closed. The sounds fade. The clink of amphorae, the low murmur of prayers at a household shrine, the rustle of linen in the night air. But softly like the flicker of a dying lamp, or the hush of a footstep across worn stone, so as you drift, of eating, of surviving. Tonight, all that remains is the calm, quiet and undisturbed, around your dreams. Rest now. Sleep, and let the dust of history settle. Good night.